Corinthians 13, 1 through 8, and 13 from the Inclusive Bible. Even if I can speak in all the tongues of the earth, and those of the angels too, but do not have love, I am just a noisy gong, a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy, such as that I can comprehend all mysteries and all knowledge, or if I have faith great enough to move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away everything I own to feed the poor and I, and hand my body to be burned, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous, it does not put on airs, and it is not snobbish, it is never rude or self-seeking, it is not prone to anger, nor does it brood over injuries. Love doesn't rejoice in what is wrong, but rejoices in the truth. There is no limits to God, to love's forbearance, to its trust, its hope, its power to endure. Love never fails. Prophecies will cease. Tongues will be silent. Knowledge will pass away. There are, in the end, three things that last: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. May these words call us to a new voice of love.
This is one of those mornings where up until 8 o'clock this morning, I wasn't sure how this was going to come together, and I'm still not. This seems to be a gift from God at times when we don't have answers, but we have more questions that we need to consider before we can come to some kind of understanding. So bear with me. There is kind of a path, but we're going to end with questions. So I'll let you know now, you're not going to get big answers. As I've shared with you, the three major portions of my sabbatical were a trip to the Netherlands and England and Wales. And for that, we talked about our place in history. Then last week was a recounting of the week that I spent in New Mexico at Ghost Ranch, specifically looking at native understandings of Earth. That's our place on Earth. And today is a retelling a bit of my trip in California to visit all the California missions, which in my mind talks about our place in community. And that means the good, the bad, and the ugly, not just sweetness. So hang on to your seats. I call this a pilgrimage because it really felt to me like it was a journey, especially a long one, made to some sacred place as an act of religious devotion. I grew up in California. I was born in Berkeley and grew up in the Bay Area. The missions were always there. They were always fascinating to me. We often would be in Carmel or Monterey, and we'd go to the mission at Carmel, San Carlos Borromeo, which is in Carmel. A beautiful place. And I was always fascinated with what this whole mission enterprise was. And now that I've spent almost 2 weeks to visit those 21 missions, I'm not even yet sure what it was, but I think I'm getting a little closer to having some understanding. There are 21 missions in what is now California. At the time it was called Alta California, and they started with the first one in San Diego in 1769. And the last one was north of San Francisco in Sonoma, and it was 1817, 18. So it was over a period of those almost 60 years that these missions were founded. The idea was it was outreach to the natives, to the indigenous folks, to convert them and to show them new ways of living that might help them. That was the mindset of the missionaries. And we know how sometimes that goes. So they were intended to be a day's journey apart. Most of them are about 30 miles apart. So to take 12 days to visit 21 of them, a total of maybe 500 miles, that's not a lot of miles every day. So I had plenty of time to spend time in the missions, to soak up what was there. And in most of them, I tried to imagine what would it have been like to be someone who'd lived there for centuries, and these weird people come in and say, we've got a better way to do things, just trust us. It was interesting what I got out of it. When I finished, when I landed in Sonoma, I'd gotten a little book, like a passport, and at each mission they would put a stamp in it so that it would prove I'd been to all of them. So I got to Sonoma and I said, this is my last one, stamp my book. And the ranger stamped the book and he said, well, I hate to tell you, but there's 16 more in Baja California. So this was a venture that started in Mexico. And as Mexico ceded what they called Alta California, they took it in the name of Spain, actually. The mission trail went further. So I have a whole other pilgrimage to do now some other time. The California missions have mostly been restored. This restoration process took place in the 50s and 60s up to the current day. Most of them were in ruin by that time, 1950. Some of them weren't, but most all of them had to be kind of rebuilt from the ground up. Some of them were rebuilt using modern techniques, and others were rebuilt using original kinds of materials. They made the adobe bricks in the old way. They used all the tools that they used. So the mission at La Purísima down near Lampo was completely rebuilt using original style materials and workmanship. And for me, that was my favorite. It was the most realistic one. This is Carmel, San Carlos Borromeo in Carmel, California. This was kind of the queen of the mission chain. It was the second founded mission, and it's where Father Serra is buried, actually. The picture you saw earlier for the Now Testament is in the Serra Garden on the other side of that church. This is La Purísima in Lampo, and for me, this was the most realistic of all of them. There was no pretty lawn, there were no neat flower arrangements, it was gritty. And for me, that's what I was looking for. What would it have been like in 1800 to live in this place? They had horses, they had sheep, they had pigs, they had a vineyard, they had an olive orchard, they had an herb garden. An amazing, amazing place. And this is now a state historic park. This is San Miguel Archangel, which is in the Salinas Valley, beautiful agricultural valley in the middle of California. And it's kind of a middle of the road one. It wasn't super fancy, it was small, and it was really welcoming. It felt like this was a place I wanted to be. And this is probably one of the most famous missions, Mission Dolores in San Francisco. It's actually Mission San Francisco de Asís, and it's given the name Dolores. For about 3 years, I lived a block away from this mission, and I never went into it. So that's kind of the outside look of the missions, and then the insides of the churches vary just as much as the outsides do. This is the chapel at San Juan Capistrano. The main church fell down in an earthquake in 1812. So they did not rebuild. It was a big stone church. But this is the oldest surviving intact chapel in the mission chain. And it's the only one left standing where Father Serra actually preached. So this historically is important. This is the Carmel mission, which is the fanciest, I think, of all of them, with an arched ceiling. This is Mission Dolores in San Francisco, intricate painting designs, all based on native designs. And this last one is at, where was this? I looked it up before we started. It's at San Miguel. Very simple design with paintings, all different kinds of things. Now, the missions were not just churches. They were intended to be communities, and they were intended to convert natives to Christianity and new ways of living, new crops to farm. The California natives were mostly hunter-gatherers. They were not farmers. And so this was an entirely different way of life. The religion was an entirely different religion. And I can't imagine what that must have been like to do that. The missions included, I think the area over on the right is all the kitchen and cooking area. There's livestock over on the left. In the center, they had some crops growing. It was a place where they could gather and meet. And in the buildings around the edge were where people lived. Sometimes there were villages of native huts that were built close to the mission as well. But it wasn't just a church. It was intended to be a community. And from everything I've read, the Franciscans intended that when they were done, whatever that meant, they would leave and all of this would remain in native hands. It was never intended to be a land grab from the Franciscans' perspective. That doesn't mean it was all good, but at least they never intended to grab the land from the natives. The governments took care of that part, and they did that quite well. The United States came in the 1840s and took all the land. This is from the mission at Santa Ynez, which is in Solvang, California, and it shows what kinds of work they did at the mission. So in 1817, there were 3,400 bushels of wheat, 3,000 bushels of corn, 80 bushels of beans, 514 bushels of peas. The Franciscans were very orderly, so they kept incredible records, most of which still exist. Livestock, 7,000 head of cattle, 7,000 head of cattle. 5,000 sheep, 100 goats, 100 pigs, 120 mules, and 600 horses. Horses were new. Natives had not seen horses before they came. So this was a new thing for them. And of course, the soldiers all were on horseback. The thing that I noticed that I think is different from the old days of the missions when I was a kid growing up, way more information about the indigenous populations who lived in those areas. Way more information. It's been a lot of fighting to get that, I think. This didn't happen by accident. So this is a group of native women who are preparing food. This is the kind of houses most of them lived in. They were huts that were thatched with reeds. And a couple of these were open. You could go inside. It's an amazing place. It's quite cozy and protected. One of the things that bothered me about that video clip was he started at the beginning and he said, California was wild and unsettled. Well, what do you call the 350,000 people who were living there? Hello? Or Columbus discovered America. No. Columbus came to it. It was already populated. So these are the kinds of things I think we have to be careful when we're studying history, and we have to dig. We have to do our own work to see what really happened. Anyway, this house, I thought this was really great. I was completely taken with the basket. And California baskets are so densely woven, they hold water. Beautiful, beautiful baskets. This is a display that showed some of the gathering of nuts and roots and the mortar and pestle. I remember being in Yosemite and seeing rocks that had indentations in them that were places where food was ground, grain was ground, in these enormous granite boulders. So the bottom line for me is, okay, the missions they're beautiful, they're interesting, the intent might have been good, but what was the cost for coming in and saying, we have it right, you have it wrong, do what we tell you to do? I don't have an answer to that. But I think it's important for us to look at some of the aspects of community that we can consider when we think about what happened in these communities. Relationships. We have relationships one with another, especially in community. And in this case, the missionaries came into communities that were already established. Power dynamics are a critical thing to think about in community. And I think in this case, the missionaries coming with the soldiers had the power edge. Sometimes. There were native uprisings that both in San Diego especially and in Santa Barbara that really showed the natives didn't like what was happening. Diversity. This is the place that we land, I think, in this congregation. We talk about being diverse and honoring diversity, respecting each person in the community. And for me, that's what this whole mission experience comes down to. There was some respect, but not a respect of the culture, and a respect of maybe we can teach each other something. Now, I know that did happen. There were several cases explaining of the natives helped the missionaries understand, well, that crop won't work that well there, let's do it over here. And the music was something, this was my main interest when I was working on a graduate degree. I wanted to do a thesis on the mission music. There's a lot of examples of music that has both the Spanish and the native elements in it. There were violins and flutes and drums and guitars and rattles. So there was a coming together there, and that's good. But, and that's where I wind up. But I shared with a friend of mine, a retired pastor, that I was still struggling with it. She had given me a bad time. She lives in Eureka. And I visited her at the end of my trip, and she said, so do I have to take off your rose-colored glasses after this wonderful visit to the missions? And I said, I don't think so. But I wrote her this week and said, they're still coming off, because I'm still trying to grasp what happened here. So as we think about the passage from 1 Corinthians that Paul shared, this is often read at weddings. It's not about romantic love.